get a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now. Okay, so we have an apparent serious oxygen leak. 4, 3, 2, 1. Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it. Performing an evasive maneuver. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Welcome to space.
Hello, listener, and welcome to Failure to Launch, the space history podcast where we walk you through every mistake, failure, and explosion that made modern space exploration possible. My name is Quinn, he, him, and I'm joined by my friends
Chris, he, him.
Nicholas, he, him.
And today we're going back to the early 1900s to talk about balloons. So, Nicholas Slayton is a journalist and contributing editor at Task and Purpose, focusing on breaking news, the Middle East, history, and UAPs. He is also the author of the Let's Do the Panic Again newsletter. Nicholas, thank you so much for coming on the show again.
I'm so happy to be here and float and deflate God.
And thank you for bringing that up because, tragically, other Chris was not able to make it to this episode. Audience, it is actually my fault. It is my schedule fuck-up that made him not able to make it at this time. He is going to be on the next one, and he did help me write this episode, so there is still the float and deflate God influence in this one. Unless float and deflate God was your quote, Nicholas, I can't remember who came up with it. It sounds like another Chris thing, though.
It was one of us. It may have been me. It may have been him. I don't know. It may have been like visitor Chris, Solaris Chris. I don't know.
You both entered a fugue state collectively and came up with it.
Eyes rolled back in our head, like Mentas from Dune, just like all in harmony.
Like the bits pouring out.
Ominous Latin chanting behind us.
Yeah, there was a clash of psyche and like the Big Bang, something came out of it.
Now, this has been a little delayed. There isn't exactly a Balloonomania series, so our audience can be forgiven for not remembering everything from last time. But you guys, what do you remember from the last Balloonomania episode?
The French, and they're horny about balloons.
Okay, the invention of inflation porn, good.
Origins of inflation porn, yes.
Reverse DNB and Foo.
Yes. The history of war balloons. There was also, in the American Civil War, there was the America Fuck Yeah balloon.
Yeah.
With an eagle carrying the flag and the portrait of a general in its talons.
So, like, I just wrote about, super aside, I wrote about this F-15E Strike Eagle that just came back from Middle East. And the plane, after pilot, the plane is called Mullet. And it has this amazing art.
Yes, I have seen Mullet, yes.
Yes, you know what I'm talking
about. I know the exact plane you're talking about. I have seen Mullet.
So it's got like a panther on it because that's like the squadron's name.
I sent other Chris Mullet too. I had sent that to him specifically. I remember.
It rules.
It does.
Like it is. My editor called it like the personification of like 90s Daytona Beach energy, and yeah, kind of is. Anyway. We have the 1860s version of that.
Yeah. So for this episode, this isn't a direct continuation from the Balloonomania. We're going to kind of jump to the 1900s, but it does have a lot of that same energy.
Bad designs, things crashing.
Oh yeah, and the French.
When
you say the same energy, do we mean like...
Not the inflation porn kind.
Okay, good. Okay.
To be fair, this one actually is more in common with our space episodes. People who are familiar with the Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 11 series, there's a lot of stuff that happens in this that is very close to that. It's not quite as soul-wrenching, though. So, for sources, I am mostly going to be relying on the book The Pre-Astronauts by Craig Ryan. As always, all links will be down below in the show notes. So, this episode is mostly going to focus on the pre-space race that happened in the 1920s and 30s, but because balloon history has a lot of fun little stories, I've decided to bookend today's episode with a couple of them. With that in mind, let's talk about the 1900 Paris Summer Olympics. It was only the second of what we'd call the modern Olympics, and it was loaded with a lot of firsts, because they were still kind of trying to figure out what the games were going to be. Basque Pelota got its first and only Olympic showing. Only 2 teams entered and the French team quit over a rules disagreement, so the Spanish team won by default. Swimming events were popular and conducted in the Seine, which is basically the same thing as swimming in the Thames. I'm pretty sure it was about as polluted then as it is now.
Not a very grand and like pompous event like we would expect the Olympics to be, just.
Well, hold on, because it did have some pomp and circumstance.
Is this for the Olympics where like they had the marathon, like everybody died and drank strychnine? Was that?
I'm
like
not
1908.
sure.
Never mind. That was 1908.
Swimmers, if your skin itches, we are not paying for it.
No. 3-time Wimbledon winner Charlotte Cooper got the gold medals in women's singles and mixed doubles tennis, becoming the first female Olympic champion. But the 1900 Olympics were also the first and only time in history that ballooning was an Olympic sport.
Okay.
So what you're saying is we have to bring it back.
We have to bring it back. And this kind of has more to do with the host country than anything. The Olympics were organized to happen during the 1900 Paris World Fair, so everything kind of had this wow, isn't France great sort of vibe to it. Since manned balloons were a French invention, of course the first French Olympics would need competitive ballooning. Also, back when the modern Olympics were founded, the idea was that they would be restricted to amateurs. On paper, this was to maintain some level of purity in the sport. They didn't want the unnecessary competition and jockeying that had come with athletes receiving money, or worse, their home countries trying to deliberately train up the best athletes to win all the medals. The secret hidden reason for this, however, was so that the earliest Olympics were almost entirely dominated by the elite. Because if you couldn't make money for doing a sport, the only way that you could practice that sport is if you were rich enough that you had the time and the money to just do it on the side and get to a professional level. That is why something like ballooning could be considered the perfect Olympic amateur sport. The only people who could compete had to be rich enough to buy and fly their own balloons. It also fit the other requirements of an Olympic sport in 1900, that it had to be open to all nations, open to all competitors, and that no one be given a handicap. In essence, it was a perfectly egalitarian sport. It didn't matter who you were or where you were from, your creed or your color. Anyone was welcome to come to Paris and fly their private balloon, as God intended. So it was basically like a formalized version of the billionaire space race. Technically, it's open to anyone. Practically, you have to be a millionaire.
Open to anyone, asterisk.
Yeah.
Saying this isn't going to be a sequel to the first episode, but remember how ballooning started right before the French Revolution?
Oh god, the amount of nobles we're about to talk about. You're gonna wish that the French Revolution did better. Now, despite all that, because transporting a balloon to France was incredibly expensive and ballooning as a sport was already dominated by weird French guys, we have no records of anyone from anywhere else competing in the balloon category. Every single competitor was French. So even the rich fucks from Britain and the UK and the US cannot afford to get a balloon to this thing. Athletes like Henri Comte de Lavaux, Henri Comte de la Valette, Léon Maison, Leon House, Jacques Faure, and Georges Castillon de Saint-Victor hauled hot air and gas balloons to Paris to compete in altitude, distance, and endurance events. Many of these guys were already established aeronauts who had definitely been paid before for their flights and sponsorships and probably weren't amateurs.
They all have very punchable names.
Do they have giant sponsorship on the balloons? On the, instead of art decoration, it's just absinthe, chartreuse, I don't know.
By that time, that was definitely a thing. It wasn't during the Olympics because they had to maintain the whole I'm an amateur thing.
Sure, but just before, they're I have this big billboard for cocaine and tobacco.
Yeah, this was a period where advertising on balloons was commonplace. Not just in the sense of oh, I'm an aeronaut and I need a little bit of money, I'm going to slap an ad on my thing. People would set up balloons on tethers and they would float over a city, and that's a way of it's a flying billboard. And to give you an idea of how elite this group was, Comte means count, i.e. nobility. So Henri Comte de Lavaux, Henri Comte de la Valette, those guys are counts. Georges Castillon de Saint-Victor was the son of a count and a princess. I took a brief skim through the list of competitors and I found 3 counts and a viscount. Now, most of the 26 events in the balloon category are dumb and have very little written about them, so I'm just going to go over the interesting ones. Admittedly, a lot of this is because there are some major name alerts in here. In closest landing to target, the winner got within 400 meters. The last place contestant, George Gass, landed 22,000 meters or 14 miles from the target.
How could he have managed that? A man named
I
Gas.
don't know.
Also, Quinn, my first thought when you were rattling off the names of the nobles is, I wonder how closely related all of them are to one another.
It's the Venn diagram probably there's a big overlap there. Henri Comte de Lavaux, Henri Comte de la Valette. Oh, here's a good one. Et Monsieur Bâtard, which literally just translates to Mr. Bastard, took home the gold in the best photograph event, beating the only other competitor and the only woman who competed in the entire balloon category. And Maurice Mallet got the most points in balloon inflation. It was the only event he competed in, and the balloon did not take off.
Wait, okay. I'm balloon inflation. I'm not going there. I'm like, what is it like? How much pressure you get on a balloon?
Just how good he could inflate his balloon.
How do you judge that?
Well, okay, so it's kind of a qualitative thing. Like, there is a proper way to inflate the balloon. If you do it the wrong way, the lines can get tangled. But it was an event where you inflate the balloon and you don't take off, and that's literally like he never flew the balloon.
We could do that. How hard could that be?
It's like an Olympic event where you're like setting up for the sprint. It's like the best pre-sprint pose, and then you just don't do the sprint, and you get a gold medal.
Fantastic.
I don't know how it was back in 1900, but I really hope it had like for free judges all of like the number, like the 9.9 signs. it's like inflation is like 8.7.
Sorry, I need to grab my cat who's being annoying.
No such thing.
I heard her screaming earlier while you were talking.
Chris, you have a perfect voice for like radio.
I know, I've been told that since I was 14.
Well, you do.
That's why I'm doing the show, you know.
Yes, well,
it's the closest thing I'll ever have.
Hour with Quinn, Chris, and Nicholas. We here are deep in the heart of the.
Forget that other guy. We never needed him. This is how coups happen.
Yes, I have a red beret on. I'm in the camo.
They never happen while the leader is in country. They happen while he's away.
No, I mean, what was it? What was it in Grenada when like the guy who got coup was like in like he was either judging a beauty pageant or giving a thing on UFOs, like a panel on UFOs.
Sorry, other Chris is not here. He's at a balloon inflating contest.
Chris could not inflate in time to arrive.
We need to just keep other Chris around, not around, but like perpetually missing, and every single episode we give a new excuse for why he's not here.
Chris is in the Saddam bunker right now.
Yep.
He's recently read a thing called the Green Book, and he's now going to reinstall the People's Jamahariya. He's now committed to Juche. I don't know if you've heard of that.
Dude, if we took like a fusion of every single dictator like philosophy, like Juche and whatever Gaddafi believed in.
You believe in Gaddafi?
Baathist Juche.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I'm stuck thinking about that meme image where it's like Burkina Faso and North Korea have made an alliance. The West is over, or something like that.
Please send that to me. There was one. It was like right after, I think it was like the coup in Niger. They have like the military guys all there. You know, they have the berets all in the camo. And it's like there was like a BBC headline about this photo, and the first comment was they're dripped out.
Yeah,
because they look great. This is not an endorsement of coups, but like compared that to like some dictators who have no fashion sense.
If the official presidential portrait of the guy who led the coup still has him wearing a balaclava, I can kind of respect that. If like no one has actually seen what the Generalissimo's face looks like.
Oh, okay. Well, no, that's Pol Pot, and that's Cambodia.
Back to balloon stuff. Now, there were actually some real events at this thing. While they didn't set a new world record, Jacques Balsan and Eugene Godard did get their open basket to an altitude of over 8,400 meters. Their notes talk about mustaches freezing solid and being so oxygen deprived they couldn't lift their air tubes. Keep note of that, that's going to be important later. But the biggest event was the endurance competition. There wasn't actually a set goal to this one. There was no like start and end point. Aeronauts were simply tasked with flying as far and as long as they possibly could. Launching from France, the runners-up made it to eastern Poland, almost 1,400 kilometers away. But Henri Comte de Lavaux and Georges Castillon de Saint-Victor, the noble tag team we talked about before, flew all the way from Vincennes in France to Kyiv in Ukraine, for a grand total of 1,925 kilometers over the course of 35 and a half hours, shattering the world's balloon distance record. There's a long fucking way to go.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not trying to be a buzzkill, but like, how do you measure that?
What's also weird is like they couldn't have taken a straight line.
What is the European jet stream? I don't even know.
I don't know. Rain.
Was someone just like in a balloon following them also? Like, how
No,
do you like, to make sure it didn't cheat and refuel or something?
And this couldn't have been like an agreement with the entire world. Like the team that landed in Eastern Poland, the team that landed in Kyiv, like how the fuck do you explain to the locals like, hi, I'm actually an Olympic gold medalist now?
No, these are rich nobles. So we just pay off the guy in Kyiv. Like, hey, say we land like 50 more meters that way.
I love the idea that
Bonjour, my name has 4 names in it.
They leave behind the pomp and circumstance of being at the place where the games are happening to just be like across the planet. They just left it. It's just they're done. That's it. They don't get to go back. They it's over.
You get to stay where you land.
The guy gets to Poland. He's like, I think we won.
Yeah, you think we won,
and then
because it's like by the time they get back, like it's over. Like everybody went home. There's no more celebration. The food's gone.
You gotta track down someone in Poland in 1900 who has a telegraph who can like get this back to the Olympics.
No, Chris, when you said like you get back and it's all over, she's like, this is just cakes going the distance or balloons.
Yeah.
Now, tragically, ballooning was never an event after the 1900 Olympics, and there's debate whether these events can be considered canon, since they were never actually awarded medals. All the winners were given plaques with a set franc value. So, like, it was they would get a silver plaque worth 100 francs. They would get a bronze plaque and whatnot. If you go on the Olympic website and look at the events at the 1900 Paris Olympics, you will not find ballooning listed. But I still think it's important to talk about, especially to help understand just how much of a cultural phenomenon ballooning was in France, even more than 100 years after the Montgolfier balloon first flew. Also just because it's funny.
Do you think that there's any like conspiracy theorists who think about, and I shouldn't say think about, but who would proclaim that like there's a conspiracy as to why the Olympics is denying the fact that the balloon race ever happened?
What kind of spy messages were delivered in that balloon? Why would a man inflate a balloon and then not fly it? Does he know?
It's like pulsing at certain levels. It's like, it's the code. It's the code. This is a book. This is an alternate history book. This is like, what is it? Like one of a serial killer at the World's Fair, Devil in White City. Just do that, but with balloons and spy shit. Somebody write this. Somebody out there listening. Free idea. Take it. It's yours. If you write it, we will read it. If you put it on AO3, we will read it one day.
The pre-space race.
Now, our main story of this episode is going to start with a man named Hawthorne Gray, an American. And he was the first man to really try and tackle the stratosphere. Basically the way he wanted to do this was he wanted to take a balloon as high up as he possibly could and really just see what would happen. Both for research and propaganda reasons, the army supported Gray's experiments. His first attempt was a disaster. See, the way ballasting balloons worked was you'd have a load of like canvas sandbags, and if you wanted to rise higher or faster, you'd pull up a bag, slice it open with a knife, and pour the sand over. Less weight means the gas can carry the balloon higher. If you wanted to lose altitude, you'd pull a rope that led to a valve on the balloon that releases gas, less buoyancy, you fall. Pretty simple. Quote from the pre-astronauts. Yet as he rose, the task of hauling the bags up, slitting and emptying them proved too much even for the robust Captain Gray. All three of his knives were dulled by the canvas and sand, and he resorted to finally clawing the bags open with his nearly frozen fingers. His efficiency deserted him, then his strength. With his oxygen supply growing steadily colder, cold enough to sting his lungs with each gasping breath, Gray passed out from hypoxia somewhere around 27,000 feet. It's also worth mentioning, this is an open gondola. This is not like a space pod. He is in a standard gas balloon, just in a basket. And maybe some winter clothes. He's going up to he's going up to airline altitudes.
Okay, what time of history are we talking about? Like, what year?
Oh
is
yeah,
this?
sorry. This is like late 1920s.
So like, okay, but the idea of rockets or like rocketry, like contemporaries like Max Valier and all those people around, this dude's just like, I'm going to go to the stratosphere in a balloon.
To be fair, this does there is a cultural, not everyone is all in on rockets. There is a big push. There's a lot of, again, like we talked about, for propaganda reasons, the army gets all in on this experiment. They support him. There is a lot of prestige around going as high as possible.
How high did you say that he went?
27,000 feet.
27,000 feet, like flat?
Yeah, just like straight up.
So, based on what you're saying about the details, I guess he lives somehow? Not to get it.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get there.
He
We'll get
flew
there.
to an altitude that is basically like brain work, please.
Hypoxia simulator.
5th highest mountain in the world levels of altitude.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have like 1920s version of Danger Zone playing this whole time.
And even like whenever you're climbing a mountain, it's incredibly, there's a shitload of exertion, but you are at least doing it at a pace that your body can somewhat adapt to. Like with these balloon flights, they are getting up to that altitude in the order of like an hour. Their body is not adapting to this. Now, while he was unconscious, the balloon evened out and started to fall fast. Chase planes estimated it was falling at around 1,200 feet per minute, which is, 14 miles an hour. Not that bad, but it's very fast for a hydrogen balloon.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. As it dropped into denser air, Gray regained consciousness just in time for the balloon to crash through some telephone wires with a lot of sparks, again for a hydrogen balloon, and slam down into a ditch, somehow not catching fire. I'm actually amazed with these stories that more of them don't catch fire. So, round 2, this time Gray made it to 42,240 feet, and this time he brought an oxygen mask. He learned from his mistakes. Unfortunately, because of how much ballast he had to drop to get to that height, he had very little left to control his descent. When he tried to vent gas, the balloon went into free fall. Gray tried throwing over everything he could, but couldn't slow the fall. Finally, at 8,000 feet, Gray had no choice but to bail out of the balloon and land under his parachute. Unfortunately, this also voided his altitude record, at least according to the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, which is basically like the International Federation of Aeronautics. Like it's the Guinness Book of World Records for flight stuff. And to them, for an altitude record to stick, the pilot had to land with the aircraft. For those who remember some of our early space stuff, this is a very similar rule. Like this makes it very difficult for the Soviets to admit how Yuri Gagarin landed whenever he first went into orbit. Vostok cosmonauts ejected from their capsule and landed by parachute. And because of that, there was a load of legal debate of like, did it count as legally going to orbit because you didn't land with your spacecraft? On the one hand, that seems kind of dumb. He did go into orbit. On the other hand, the Soviets clearly didn't want to engage with it because they lied and said that he landed with his spacecraft. Fun tangent.
Listen, you go to orbit.
Yeah.
If you worry about that, that's on you. You got issues.
All right, third try. Gray and his team spent months on testing and redesigning the balloon with what they had learned. They redid the valves and the ballast to make them easier to use at high altitude. They also tortured some cats, shoving them into depressurization chambers to see how they'd handle the stratosphere. It was discovered that animals die when they don't get oxygen to breathe with. Groundbreaking.
Much like humans.
I was going to say Hopper and Gray seems pretty cool. Now I'm thinking to myself, yeah, you're a piece of shit. You should have crashed.
Just like, you have been to the stratosphere before. You know what happens.
Yeah, but see, cats land in the feet when they fall, unlike humans.
Fair point.
Cats are just better than us.
Also, at no point in this process was the gondola itself redesigned. I need to be clear again, this is not a capsule. Gray was flying in a wicker basket. His PPE for going to near space was a winter jacket, some gloves, and an oxygen mask that froze to his face. At 20,000 feet, ice started to form on the gondola and inside his mask. His journal reads, quote, symptoms of rickets. At 30,000 feet, his clock broke, and when he tried to throw over an oxygen tank for ballast, it broke the antenna on his radio, immediately isolating him from the world.
Not a good feeling.
I'm just staring at my wall, like in shock. Like, what did you think was going to happen on your third try?
I still just love the horrible luck of you throw ballast over and you just watch as it like tumbles down and just like suddenly your radio goes silent.
And you're too cold, you got the oxygen mask on, so you can't just yell, fuck, because you can't clear the air for it.
Your saliva just flash freezes. Quote, at 40,000 feet, Gray, by now severely hypoxic and shivering uncontrollably, scrawled the final entry in his log. Sky deep blue, sun very bright, sand all gone. The Army planes had long since lost Gray in the thick cloud cover somewhere near the Illinois-Kentucky border and had returned to Scott Field. The balloon slowly drifted back down to Earth and was found the next day stuck in a tree in Sparta, Tennessee. Hawthorne Gray's corpse was slumped in the gondola, an oxygen mask still clamped to his face. So there was actually a lot of disagreement back then on what exactly killed Gray. Medically, it was likely hypoxia, though some argued that he'd accidentally severed his oxygen line or that he'd gotten so hypoxic he didn't have the energy to open a new tank. Amusingly, the New York Times wrote that the pressure drop had probably exploded all of his organs at once, killing him instantly, even though his body was just perfectly intact.
He simply floated too high and God was offended and he smited him.
Yeah, and he just popped.
It's good to know that sensationalism for money has never changed.
Everyone else's headline is just tragic death of aeronaut, and the New York Times is just
Aeronaut explodes.
popped.
No, it has to be slightly passive, so it'd be in sky, aeronaut dies, or something like that.
Yes.
And of course, meanwhile, Gray's army sponsors are probably wow, this failed. Let's put $10 billion more into it.
Get more cats.
No!
We've graduated from the cat test, we've moved up to the people tests, and we've found out that people also die when they don't get oxygen good.
And somewhere, 40 years later, NASA's gonna be like, hey, I found this notebook when we go to space from the 20s. Oh, this is huge news, guys!
Guys, you're not going to believe this. Now, regardless of why he died, Hawthorne Gray's death effectively became the starting bell for a number of teams across the world to continue pushing the altitude record. It's not certain exactly how high he flew on the mission that killed him, but we know that it's between 43,000 and 44,000 feet. Whether the FAI gave it to him, since, the first time they didn't give it to him because the pilot hadn't landed with the craft, and the second time the pilot had landed dead, aeronauts around the world considered Gray the current record holder, and they set out to beat it. By the time the pre-space race ended about 8 years later, the record would stand at 72,000 feet. Now, the first successful stratospheric flight was run by a Swiss scientist named Auguste Piccard, and he was pretty much the opposite of Hawthorne Gray. Where Gray was a thick-set soldier setting out into the sky for adventure and fame, Piccard was basically the prototypical dorky scientist.
Scrawny and lightweight, much more suitable for airfly.
Significantly more efficient, a lot less dense.
Much more efficient at the flying and possibly going into space thing.
You could just bail himself over and he wouldn't need a parachute. He'd fall like a piece of paper.
His terminal velocity is not fatal.
Now, he had also studied Gray's last flight and taken some lessons from it. The biggest was the gondola. Piccard figured all of Gray's problems stemmed from the fact that he was sitting exposed in a basket in the stratosphere, so he developed what was basically a proto-spacecraft. As Piccard himself put it, quote, "We must have a hermetically sealed cabin, carrying breathable air at ordinary pressure, and able to resist this internal pressure even when the outside pressure will be no more than 1/10 of an atmosphere. Our lives depend on the airtightness and the strength of this cabin." Now, in case you thought that they had gone completely scientific and didn't have to do a bit of scraping, here's a picture of Piccard and his assistant Charles Kipfer before the flight. For the audio audience, can you guys describe what these guys are wearing?
They,
Well, lab coats.
Yeah.
And then something that looks like a cross. I mean, it looks like a basket upside down on their head.
It's like they're wearing a bonnet with a basket on it.
Yeah, or if you've ever seen the horribly cliche and somewhat racist genie turban, poofy headgear stuff, Solstice type things,
kind of like that.
with a basket on top of that.
The actual answer is that those are wicker chicken baskets packed with pillows that they were using as crash test helmets.
These guys are professionals.
Points for inventiveness. I mean, I can't imagine that actual crash test helmets existed back then.
I mean, it's better than nothing, but
Yeah.
Well, okay. So hang on. We're in the 20s, right?
This is 1930 at this point.
Okay, yeah. So submarines are decades in existence. We had U-boats in World War I. People know you need airtight containers and pressure exists, right? This is going to drive me crazy. Sorry.
Part of their designs are actually based on bathyspheres, based on these early submarines. The FNRS, named after the Belgian Fonds National de la Recherche Scientifique, basically the research organization that paid for the flight, took off for the first time on May 27th, 1931. They had a rocky start. Almost immediately after taking off, the capsule sprung a leak, and by the time they plugged it, they'd lost about 2/3 of their oxygen. Unfazed, Piccard opened a flask of liquid oxygen and poured it all onto the floor to top up the capsule's atmosphere, which I love. They didn't have spare tanks or anything. They just had just splat, Oh man, I'm getting a little hypoxic. You mind splashing me some liquid oxygen?
Liquid oxygen is not something that reads as it wants to exist.
No. Liquid oxygen is what killed Hari in the bonus
I was just
episode.
going to say, isn't that?
For those who know, yeah, just... Oh man, Auguste Picard just like taking a swig of liquid oxygen.
One of them looks like Sartorius and Snout. They look like Sartorius and Snout. Great.
Yeah, I mean, they do.
Everything is just a circle. It's all cyclical.
A circle is a sphere is a balloon.
Half an hour after takeoff, the balloon reached a peak altitude of 51,200 feet, well into the stratosphere. They had some scientific equipment, and Picard tried to make a lot of observations and readings, but one thing I actually really like about reading his journal is that it just kind of, every time he tries to write about the scientific stuff, it just turns into him being really odd at just looking out the window.
Physicists cannot explain very well the color of the stratosphere.
And then things got a lot worse. When it was time to start the descent, Picard discovered that the line leading to the gas vent had gotten tangled and wouldn't open. They would have no control over their descent, and the only way to get to the ground was to wait for night when the cold would naturally contract the balloon. As they waited, being what Picard called prisoners of the stratosphere, the balloon drifted further and further south from their starting point in Augsburg, Germany. They crossed into Austria by evening and floated right into the Alps. So in the middle of the night, these guys are basically flying a giant hydrogen balloon by instruments, dodging mountains and glaciers. Like, they come very close to slamming into a giant ice crevasse.
This rules. This is amazing.
The thing that is very common, there are good quotes about this, is that for all of the danger of going up, like, everything happens whenever they're coming down. There are so many balloonists in history who have gone to, like, high altitudes and then just died because they fucked up the landing. I mean, that is the rules of, like, rockets and airplane. That's the rule of everything. It's the landing that kills you.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the two most dangerous points of any flight is the takeoff and landing.
They had like some control at this point to like dodge the stuff, or no?
I mean, the control they had at this point was throwing extra stuff overboard.
Oh, okay. Because I was in my head, I was picturing like an.
It's kind of tough to explain, but there was a balancing act between. So you have to drop ballast on your way up in order to maintain your like rate of climb, but you also wanted to leave a little bit of ballast at the end in order to control your landing.
Because I was just picturing them like leaning to one side or something to try like steer it like a bike. Like, you know, they're barely dodging like trees and crevices, and they're just, you know, full on extreme sports at it.
And something you see with a lot of these flights is the kind of call of the void. Is these guys get to these incredibly high altitudes and they either say, let's push it, let's drop a little bit more ballast, or I want to stay around here a little longer, let's drop our ballast. And then as they're coming down for landing, they're like, wow, we're descending way too quick. We need to drop some ballast. Oh shit, we don't have any. And this is kind of what these guys wind up doing. Like, they have the opposite problem. They can't vent any gas at all. And they're coming down very slow, under no control.
Pissing and shitting the light and the load like last time.
Oh, I forgot that was in the last one. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Who can forget?
Oh, and the hybrid balloon. The balloon where you have a bonfire underneath a hydrogen bag. I loved that one. I
still love, was it Nadar's, the Giant?
Oh, yeah. So eventually the balloon landed on the ice near the town of Obergurgl. They spent the night huddled in the freezing capsule before trekking to civilization in the morning, where they were treated as national heroes. Both Picard and Kipfer were knighted, and the FAI acknowledged them as the first people to survive a trip into the stratosphere. When asked if he planned on pushing the record further, Auguste Picard said, quote, I made this flight because I had agreed to do so, but I cannot expose my wife and children to another such period of mental distress. So then he made another flight the year after, breaking his own record.
Me about to say, yeah, what a guy. But, yeah, what a guy.
Yes. Sorry, kid, the balloon's call.
Hey, sorry, broad. Gotta go back up into the stratosphere.
One last job. Just one last job.
I'm going out and getting cigarettes and then just like looking out in the backyard as a balloon starts flying off into the sky and just like disappearing like Team Rocket. Now, like Max Valier, who had died about a year prior, Picard started an international lecture tour, trying to educate the masses about space science and drum up some hype for other adventurers to push the envelope even further. He talked about rocket planes and how his design for an airtight capsule would one day carry humans well into orbit and even to the moon.
And he was right.
He was right, because his design gets kind of copied by the Soviets, and the Soviet balloon capsule design is what gets turned into Vostok, which carries the first people into orbit. And I do need to be clear here, I do think that Picard was genuine about wanting to get more people involved in the science. I think he was one of those space evangelists who helped pave the way for Vostok and Apollo and all the rest.
I'm a big fan of the bathysphere.
I know we talked about this with Solaris, but again, I keep picturing like all the Shock games, like Bioshock, this is a Shock, Bioshock Infinite, just like.
Well, this is just Bioshock Infinite now, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Can you just imagine like being like, what is it, Hawthorne Graves, like a soldier, you know, he's a classic, he's like, I'm a generic soldier and scientist.
Oh, he's fucking Booker DeWitt, hell yeah.
Yes!
He's in the right time period.
He gets there, he's like freezing, he's lost oxygen. All of a sudden he wakes up, he's on a floating city, he's like, what the hell? And someone's like, Hawthorne, catch!
Hawthorne, drugs.
Hawthorne, please help us smuggle this illegal alcohol back into the United States.
Do this cocaine, Hawthorne. It'll put the pep right back in your step, my son.
Considering what pilots, I mean, I guess that's more of a World War II thing of pilots just using ridiculous amounts of stimulus to stay flying. What the effects of different drugs, like how that would change in the stratosphere.
Well, I was kind of tempted to ask, did anyone have like alcohol with them or any, like, you know, when we talk about the ballast of internal organs, and they were drinking, they emptying wine bottles last time, like was, well, I'm going to go to Stratosphere. I should bring like a bottle of whiskey. I'm an American guy. In
order to drain that, you would have to expose your junk to like 72,000 feet altitude, which would not go well. And it's on to the alcohol question, I'm not certain.
All right, hear me out. You will pee into a funnel that is connected to a tube inside of the pod, and then the tube goes outside.
Okay, but that's basically what Gemini had. It works theoretically
on the pod.
Yeah, you just have an increasingly long piss icicle hanging below the pod.
And then it snaps off and falls 50,000 feet to impale some poor soul below.
That would not be the weirdest way someone died in the 20s, though.
It's like the JFK ice bullet, but it's a pissicle, you know?
Now, we're going to get to the next guy, Tex Settle.
Yes.
Now, Auguste Picard's lecture tour got him a lot of attention. Now, most of this were for his achievements and the newfangled science he was evangelizing, but part of it was because of what he could offer. Ever since the first Montgolfier flight, balloons were seen as a powerful tool for propaganda and advertising. The Chicago World Fair was right on the horizon, and eager for a big scientific achievement to showcase, officials from the fair offered Picard the chance to captain a launch they planned for the summer of 1933. He turned them down, but he did offer an alternative, his twin brother, Jean Picard, who, yes, these two are collectively the inspiration for the Star Trek captain. Auguste Picard seems to have been more of the actual explorer, and Jean-Luc Picard, Jean Picard, just has the name.
When you say twins, are we talking identical twins?
I'm talking identical twins, which I was reading that and I was thinking, like, I wonder if he actually told them that Jean Picard was his twin, or if he was just like, hey, Jean, just show up here, and they just thought, like, if he had played a switcheroo on them, and this poor guy was suddenly just thrust into captaining a stratospheric balloon.
Zero experience.
Now, Jean Picard was just as much a genius as his brother Auguste, and he immediately started working on a balloon of his own design. The only problem was that Jean wasn't a certified balloon pilot, and no one wanted to fly with him. For example, when Chicago officials approached veteran American aeronaut Ward Van Orman about piloting the balloon, he turned them down. Quote, Van Orman did not like the idea of attempting such a challenging flight with Jean Picard. He had first met Picard at the Goodyear plant, and he had been uncomfortable around him from the beginning. Picard's eccentric nature and lack of aeronautical experience were bad signs. So this is not just like they want to fly solo, or that it's not purely that Picard is inexperienced. They just think he's weird as fuck. They don't like him. He's gonna like vent all of their air for no reason. But Van Orman did recommend a friend of his, Tex Settle. Settle was a Navy lieutenant and an accomplished balloon racer. He was also the only person on the planet, and throughout all of human history, no one has since topped this. He was the only person qualified to fly a glider, a balloon, an airplane, a blimp, and a rigid airship.
He's flown it all. And for a moment there, I thought that you were going to just full stop be like, he's the only person on the planet. Tex Settle.
Okay, the name and all that stuff, he sounds like a pulp hero. This is 1933, you say? Navy guy. This dude just got to be punching.
He's
mobsters
from
and
a comic
Nazis.
book. Yeah, I guarantee.
Who was our first pilot before Tex?
Hawthorne Gray?
We had Hawthorne Gray.
No.
and
But
then
the guy who was weirded out by
Jean Picard. Or sorry, Ward Van Orman.
Ward Van Orman, too weirded out by Jean Picard. So I suppose you can say that Jean Picard had to settle for Tex.
Except Settle also hated him personally, and he didn't want to fly with him. But instead of turning them down, what Settle did was he asked like the Chicago World Fair officials, like he's like, I want to fly this solo. I don't want to fly with him. Fire him immediately. And they agreed.
They could just do that?
Yeah.
So Jean Picard doesn't even get to go on his own mission?
The mission that he was like doppelgangered into.
And the one where he mostly designed the balloon, he doesn't get to fly in it. I don't have it in the script, but Jean Picard does later go on to do a couple of high altitude flights with his wife.
Who's his wife? Who's his wife? Quinn, who's his wife? Tell us. What was her name?
I don't remember his wife's name.
Beverly Crusher Picard.
Fine, I'm looking it up on Kindle.
Okay, super quick aside, I looked up Tex Settle. He does not look like as cool as his name sounds.
Okay, here's the very dumb thing. Do you want to guess what Jean Picard's wife's name is? Jeanette.
God damn it!
It's Jeanette Picard. We've got Jean Picard and Jeanette Picard.
God damn it. Everything is a circle. It's all cyclical. A circle is a sphere, is a balloon.
Everything can be inflated.
Everything can be inflated. Everything is permitted.
Tito to Stalin, 1952.
Now, Tex Settle set his flight for August 5th, 1933, taking off from Soldier Field, a big stadium in Chicago. The bleachers were packed with 20,000 cheering spectators who showed up at 4 a.m. to watch the balloon lift off, carrying the first American to the stratosphere. You want to guess how high they got?
500 feet.
5,000 feet.
Oh my god, perfect. Exactly. Tex Settle planned to level off the flight at 5,000 feet and wait for the sun to come out and kind of like warm up the balloon. And while he waited, he ran a couple of checks on all the scientific equipment, and he gave the gas release valve a quick test to make sure that it would actually work later. Quote from the pre-astronauts. But the gas valve stuck open and began spilling the entire contents of the gas, which had been donated by the Union Carbide Company, into the sky over Chicago. A company you love to hear about in the context of dumping gas onto a city. Union fucking Carbide. For context, audience, Union Carbide is the people behind the Bhopal disaster in India. You can find that. Go listen to Well, There's Your Problem on that. You'll be mad. 15 minutes after takeoff, Settle's balloon, named A Century of Progress, dropped onto some railway tracks 2 miles away from where it started and was immediately mobbed by souvenir hunters with knives who chopped the balloons to ribbons. Which is just, yeah, people wanted, this was a historic flight. Even if it was embarrassing, people like descended on and just started like cutting little bits of the balloon off.
It could have been reused and they like gang upon it like a pack of wild animals.
I'm amazed some of them weren't just like, yo, I've got Tex Settle's nose, just running away.
Wait, it's like how far away from like the launch point was this?
2 miles.
Like, we're still in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Settle needed a group of Marines to protect the balloon and keep the crowd away, something they did so effectively that it left the balloon covered in blood stains. So America's first attempt to like really reach the stratosphere, they're like, this balloon also has a similar to Picard's balloon. It has like a pod. It's fully enclosed. This is futuristic. This is like cutting edge tech. And it has landed hilariously badly. It has been torn to shreds by souvenir hunters, and the Marines have like done some police brutality and covered it in blood.
I was worried for a moment when you had mentioned that it landed on train tracks that it too was about to be pummeled by a train.
If it had just been immediately flattened.
Just like some guys who used to work for Al Capone, they want to, strip the sci-fi pod for copper. And then, some Marines were probably just back from doing, crimes against humanity in Haiti are just like, nope, let's stop them. No one comes out looking good.
Mr. Settle, we've protected your balloon.
I hope he was like inside the pod the entire time and she just opens up the hatch. She's like, holy shit.
He just gets out like, oh, that was a good nap. Man, I made it. Awesome. Now, we get to talk about the Soviet Union.
Play the theme right now.
I will do the drop. I don't have the drop ready. I will put it in.
Okay, but I'm just saying.
Basically, Tex wanted to do a second round. He put out basically an apology to the world saying like, sorry, I messed this up. I want to go again. And his sponsors, until something happened. And that something was the Soviet Union.
Was the communists.
Sorry. Comrade, we hear your name is Tex. We will still help you.
Now, at the time, the Soviet high-altitude balloon program was viewed as like mysterious and inscrutable. Because the Soviet Union wasn't actually part of the FAI, and thus the FAI didn't recognize them or send any observers, any results from the Soviets were self-reported and, they were like unofficial to the rest of the world. For what it's worth, while the FAI ignored them, most aeronauts around the world considered the Soviet numbers valid and generally viewed the Soviet aeronauts as just any other explorers of the stratosphere. This is a similar kind of attitude to what you see with scientists on both sides of the Cold War during the space race. For example, when Sputnik launched and Wernher von Braun was like cursing that Sergei Korolev had beaten him, scientists like Theodor von Karman were ecstatic. It brings me no pleasure to say it as an engineer, but the engineers tend to be a lot more egotistical, like I want to be the first, and the scientists tend to be more like I only care that someone is doing it. Anyway, I want to take a second to talk about how the Soviet balloon program, or programs more accurately, were organized, because the reality was a lot more complicated and stupid than the monolithic state enterprise that it looked like from the outside. When Auguste Piccard flew in 1931, it piqued the interest of Soviet aeronauts in Oso Aviakim.
Is this an OKV situation?
So this actually isn't, although it does kind of tie in. So Oso Aviakim is not to be confused with Operation Oso Aviakim, which is the Soviet version of Operation Paperclip.
Oh.
Yeah, and they're completely separate. What Oso Aviakim was it's sort of like if you combined a military reserve unit, the Air Cadets, and a sports club all in one, and then that organization grew almost as powerful and influential as the actual army. It's kind of like if the IRGC in Iran really, really, really loved soccer.
Do you think that they could get into the World Cup if they tried?
I feel like they kind of do, though, already. I mean, just saying.
It's like if the Boy Scouts got 20% of the military budget.
Like think of all of the camping supplies they could purchase. Think of all like the soap cars they could make.
Oso Aviakim had their own military bases, airfields, and combat aircraft. This Boy Scouts Air Cadets thing evolves to the point where it's almost more powerful than the actual Soviet Air Force.
Here's my new merit badge for, combined arms offensive.
Basically what its role was in trying to modernize the Soviet military, they needed to get a lot of people educated and interested first, because you can't just take someone off the streets and make them a pilot. Ideally, if you want them to be a good pilot, they have to be interested since they were a kid. If you can recruit a kid who has done glider training, who knows how planes work, that's awesome. And Oso Aviakim existed to churn out the next generation of Soviet pilots, engineers, and technicians.
Considering I haven't heard of this, I can only assume that, maybe it gets purged at some point?
If you've ever heard of DOSAF, DOSAAF, that is what Oso Aviakim gets renamed to, and it continues kind of doing the same thing. It still exists in some capacity in, Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. This continues being a thing in post-Soviet countries, but Oso Aviakim at this period in the 1930s is whenever it has, ballooned to be a genuine rival to the Air Force. Later on, it gets kind of put in its place. So, on top of training up the next generation of Soviet pilots, Oso Aviakim was the umbrella organization for a load of Soviet aerospace research. Part of this was propaganda value. If the Soviets achieved big firsts in the air, then Soviet kids would flock to Oso Aviakim to learn how to fly. But from what I've been able to find, there was also a genuine interest in Oso Aviakim, in this organization, to further aerospace research. There were true believers in this. For example, the GIRD, the first Soviet rocket program, and where Sergei Korolev got his start, was funded and run through Oso Aviakim. That was the umbrella project that got the first Soviet rockets going. High-altitude balloons were completely in their wheelhouse, but they weren't the only ones interested in competing with Piccard and the Americans.
Are the French coming back?
Not the French, surprisingly. The Air Force. See, despite the whole point of Oso Aviakim being to feed pilots, technicians, and engineers to the Soviet Air Force, the two groups competed with each other all the time and not in the fun, sporting way. After Piccard's flight demonstrated that a fully sealed space pod could allow a crew to survive at extreme altitudes, both organizations realized that if they succeeded in impressing the Kremlin, they would be given sole ownership of all Soviet high altitude and eventually space research. So basically the idea is that the Kremlin wasn't going to pay for two parallel programs. They would let them compete for a little while and then they would pick the winner. If this sounds familiar to you, listener, this is exactly the same system that the US tried to use whenever the US Army, Air Force, and Navy all competed for ownership of America's ballistic missiles and their satellite launchers.
This is a show. This is a TV show. Just Air Force and like
everything repeats
fighting.
itself all the time. Yeah, like the Air Force versus the Boy Scouts.
And it's Russian or Soviets. Everyone's hammered on vodka.
Time is again a closed circle.
Now, in the end, with Kremlin approval, 3 Soviet state organizations, 1 military and 2 civilian, gave high-altitude balloons a shot. The National Meteorology Committee's program immediately ran into funding problems and was shuttered soon after. RIP. Oso Aviakam's project, meanwhile, also ran into funding problems. They got just enough money that they could scrape by on life support, but not make any real progress. Meanwhile, the Soviet Air Force threw rubles at their balloon, and on September 30th, 1933, the USSR-1 or CCCP-1 or Stratostat rose to a reported height of 62,304 feet, more than 9,000 more than Picard's record. Again, this was unofficial because the Soviets didn't participate in the FAI and it never recognized their flights in turn. Most aeronauts treated this as a real record.
You said 62,000 feet?
62,304.
I'm doing some mental math, but that's 2 Everests.
Yeah, just about. The military crew, led by Commander Georgy Prokofiev, landed as heroes. The USSR-1 was treated like a sort of proto-Sputnik, an example of the supposedly backwater Soviet Union pushing science well ahead of the West. Massive rallies were held in Moscow. The crew and even a few of the balloon's designers were all given the Order of Lenin, the highest civilian award the Soviets had. Walter Duranty, a journalist with the New York Times living in Moscow, explained the impact of the flight like this. Yesterday's events did more to strengthen the Kremlin's prestige and stimulate the masses than anything the writer has seen before. The psychological effect in Russia is comparable to the effect in the United States of Lindbergh's flight to Paris.
Okay.
Yeah, this was huge.
I'm guessing these guys don't become fascists, but
Yeah.
Oh god, if I were to say, hold that thought.
Imagine being Soviakum guys, and you're being outdone by the nobility and the military who get all the money and all the prizes. The game was rigged from the start. Just like the 1929 French Olympics. Or when was it? Was it 29? Did you say it was 29?
It was 1900.
That was just 1900. Okay.
Yeah. It was the second modern Olympics ever.
Just like the 1900 French Olympics, where fuck you if you were a poor young boy who was enthusiastic about flying a balloon. You don't have enough money. And the people who win all the money and get all the prizes and have all the balloons, well, they're just the nobility.
We need a socialist communist revolution against these elites in the Soviet Union.
The elites of the military in the Soviet Union getting all of the money and the fun.
Get rid of them.
They themselves are counter-revolutionary.
Well, I mean, no, we established last time that the balloon is a distinctly revolutionary vehicle.
Time is a flat circle. A circle is a sphere, and a sphere
actually, no, it probably is counter-revolutionary because the nobility ride around in balloons. Okay, good.
So wait, are we like precluding the idea of like a Soviet cultural revolution here, tied like a Boy Scout?
Well, we'll get to the Boy Scouts in a second and how they do balloons. Bracket's not good.
Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, a 13-year-old ain't really good at this.
Now, this flight was good for more than just the Soviets, because as we've talked about on this show so many times, leveraging competition is a great way for a project to get support. Before the Stratostat flew, Tech Settle back in America was struggling to come up with the funds and official approval he'd need for a second try. Less than 2 months after the Soviet flight, he got his chance, taking the repaired Century of Progress up to an official height of 61,237 feet. It's less than the Soviets got, but remember that because, again, I keep saying this, the Soviets did not participate in the FAI, so technically he got the altitude record. Also, this was the exact same balloon. They did not replace it. They just patched it up. They patched every single hole and I hope washed away the blood.
That is actually impressive that it's just like that they didn't like make any big modifications. I'm actually impressed. It's like, well, okay, how many from the failed flight with all the violence to this one? How many months are we looking at here?
This was
Relatively short time frame.
Okay, so 2 months after this, and the Soviets flew. Okay, so August. This is November. This is November 1933. So it has been about 3 months since the failed flight. They have had 3 months.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, the turnaround time between the first Tech Settle failed flight and the second one is 3 months.
Okay, maybe there was still blood on that balloon.
So when this flight ended, did it land on a train track again?
No.
Was it mobbed by frothing
By
masses?
Chicagoans, yeah. Like braving Marines machine gun fire to get at the balloon.
Yeah, you want to get stabbed?
This one's for Al.
I'm getting in the balloon. Oh, dude, a balloon hijacking would be the coolest thing.
Oh, God. Balloon DB Cooper?
Yeah, a Chicago guy putting a knife to Tech Settle's throat and just like take this balloon to Cuba.
I've been just like hanging out hour after hour.
Yeah. Now, although he was treated as a hero for his flight, Tech Settle never claimed the official record, and from his writing, he wasn't comfortable with all of the fame given to him. He also came out of this with like a very different view of high altitude research than what a lot of people assumed. He wrote in the New York Times, quote, "There probably is plenty of poetry about the dead quiet, the bitter cold, and the queer coloring of the stratosphere, but we had little or no chance to consider such things. We were seldom permitted the time to look out the windows of our gondola or to contemplate the scientific advance that made it possible to live in security and comfort up there, where until only a few years ago no human being could breathe. Ballooning, whether to the stratosphere or to heights where man is no stranger, is chiefly work," which I like because that's another like great parallel to astronauts, where you're up there, you're this like pinnacle of human achievement, and you don't really care because you have a 20-hour per day workload. So the first Soviet flight, the Air Force flight, was in September of 1933. The second Settle flight was in November. The next big flight was in January of 1934, and it would not be as successful. And this is something that I'm very happy we have come back to. Annoyed by the success of the American flight, even though it hadn't actually flown higher than the Soviet Stratostat, Joseph Stalin ordered Oso Aviakum to rush and have a balloon flight ready to coincide with the 17th All-Union Communist Party Congress in Moscow.
In time for the holidays.
Yes! We've got something for the holidays. This despite the fact that there was a massive winter storm forecasted for that area.
Oh, come on.
So they're sending 3 people in like the worst winter storm in a long time, and it's gotta be for the holidays.
This is the proto. We would like something from the holidays. This is the proto. It's the example of the Soviets doing this.
Yeah, because every other time we've talked about this, it's been Khrushchev, it's been Brezhnev. This is Stalin, and this is 1933. This is like it's not related to space. This is the granddaddy. I'm amazed they didn't learn from this example because this does not end well.
So yeah, de-Stalinization really went so far, except for this one thing.
So remember that Oso Aviakum's balloon project was still underfunded and behind schedule. When Stalin ordered them to have a flight ready for January, that order did not come with any additional support. But they couldn't exactly say no. Stalin told them to just get it done, so they got it done. On January 30th, 1934, a crew of civilian aeronauts, Pavel Fedosenko, Andrei Vasenko, and Ilya Usiskin boarded the Oso Aviakum 1 and took off from Mordavia in modern Russia. What we know of the flight is that the ascent went well. The civilian crew broke the Air Force's record, reaching an altitude of 67,585 feet. They spent a few hours floating up there, taking scientific readings and looking out the portholes. As much as we've talked about record flights in this episode, it bears repeating that these men were the highest up of any living thing ever in Earth's history at the time. Where things went wrong was on the descent. In order to stay at altitude as long as they did, the crew basically made the same mistake as Hawthorne Gray. They dumped way too much ballast too early. This meant that when they wanted to descend, they were light and needed to vent more hydrogen gas. This worked at first, and they started to lose altitude at good speed, but as they dropped into colder air, the hydrogen became less buoyant, and their descent turned into a dive. The normal thing to do here would be to dump more ballast, lightening the capsule and slowing the fall a bit. But lest you think this disaster was entirely because of crew error, there were also a lot of design problems. It wouldn't have been a comfortable flight, but the crew did have enough ballast to stabilize their fall. They just couldn't dump it fast enough. So basically what they had was they had some of the ballast inside, and they had a pressurized chute. They had an airtight chute that you could load the ballast in, and then it would like airlock one side, and it would dump it out.
Cool.
The problem was that chute took way too long, and it couldn't accept nearly enough ballast. The stat they gave in testing, in like the report after, was that in order to dump all of the ballast from this balloon, took a crew working nonstop 1 hour. And these guys are plummeting towards the Earth, and they need to dump all of their ballast in like 2 minutes tops.
This is not going to end well.
Oh, yeah. This is Balloon Soyuz 11. Great.
Hold that thought until
God
right
damn
now.
it.
Until right now, don't worry. The backup plan, bailing out and parachuting to the ground, was also impossible. The only hatch was sealed with 12 wing nuts that would take minutes to open even in the best circumstances. This is the parallel to Soyuz 11 and like the air vent that pops open. And compare this, something I found interesting was that the USSR-1, the Air Force's balloon, it was significantly more safe. It had like a double layer construction to help with pressure. It was able to drop ballast a lot faster, and it had 2 hatches, and those hatches could be opened quickly. They basically had like the submarine door, like you spin the ratchet and it opens up right away.
I know we were on a time crunch, but
Even
surely
then,
they had an idea, right?
like there are some things that can be attributed to the rush, and there are some that it can be attributed to like this design was flawed from the start. The hatch design was not a rush. That was the original plan. So as the balloon fell faster and faster, it put more and more strain on the ropes connecting the balloon to the capsule. Quote, on the famous Red Army balloon Stratostat, the foot ropes had been attached to a net that surrounded the entire envelope. On the Oso Aviacum 1, the ropes were merely attached to a large belt that ran horizontally around the envelope's base, a fatal flaw. One by one, the ropes popped. At 1,500 feet, the last one gave way and the gondola shot earthward like a cannonball. It came down near the village of Potish Ostrog, 150 miles east of Moscow. All 3 men were killed on impact.
Damn it.
Yep.
It happened again.
Rest in peace.
Do you want the tiniest silver lining?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. When ground crews found the wreckage, some of the instrumentation had survived, and it indicated that the balloon had reached an altitude, at peak, of 72,158 feet, smashing the Air Force's record by more than 5,000 feet. Hooray!
They did it.
I knew we could.
Reason why they were able to do it is, again, that like they got to altitude, and they were like, I want to go higher, I'm going to dump more ballast. But even then, the amount of ballast is kind of academic because they did not have the ability to dump ballast fast enough. So it's like there's multiple fatal flaws here that all kind of interact.
I know you guys talk about Khrushchev and the other leaders after this, but since this is Stalin, since we have a Stalin moment, do we have any idea what his reactionary public statements were about this?
Oh God, hold that thought. This is where you get mad.
Why? Why do I open my mouth? Why do I open my mouth?
Now, normally a failure like this in the Soviet Union would be covered up. Indeed, before launch, Oso Aviacum was instructed to keep the flight top secret. But when it was moved up to line up with the holidays and became a propaganda tool, the Soviets started to advertise the flight, both to their own citizens and the world. Like Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 11 decades later, they could not cover it up because they had made sure that people already knew about it. But if you can't hide a failure, you can still do the next best thing. You can turn it into a propaganda bonanza. The first announcement of the accident was made in front of the Communist Party Congress. The way they describe it, it's basically like a play. Like one guy stands up and he tearfully tells everybody, that this horrible accident has happened. And then he sits down and someone else stands up and goes like, these men, like he gives this long-winded speech about how brave these men were and they need to have a state funeral. It needs to be in Red Square. The crew were posthumously given the Order of Lenin and buried in Red Square in a massive state funeral. This is the only group funeral of its kind that happens until Soyuz 11 decades later. At this funeral, Stalin, Molotov, and Voroshilov, the men most responsible for rushing the flight and making this happen, they carried the crew's urns. They made themselves the central figures of this funeral that they caused. The town near the crash site was even renamed Usiskin after the youngest of the aeronauts. So yeah, nothing is sacred, and scientific achievements will serve state propaganda whether they succeed or fail. They are always useful. I guess this is kind of like the Nixon speech he had prepped just in case Apollo 11 failed. Oh.
God damn it, Stalin.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're dead.
Damn it, Stalin.
Stalin can't die enough times.
Now, there was a bit more flights in kind of the story of the pre-space race, and we will probably get to them. There aren't really any failures, though, and that's mostly what we focus on with this show. However, I said I was going to bookend this episode with fun stories. So at the top, we talked about the Balloon Olympics.
It's time for dessert.
It's time for Muammar Gaddafi.
Yes.
Chaos Agent.
Gaddafi.
To cap things off, I thought I would walk everyone through a story that actually you, Nicholas, pointed me towards.
Oh, yes.
I immediately wanted to make an episode out of it because of the title Balloonist Blown by Gaddafi Whims, or as I first read it, Balloonist Blown by Gaddafi. If you're on YouTube, you will be seeing that headline up right now. This does come out of The Independent, a British newspaper. I don't know if it's reputable or not. I have not really read it.
Oh.
You sound like you know some stories there, Nicholas.
Yes. If I believe it. Hang on. I think I have this right. Yeah. Hang on. I'm just gonna post a link in the chat, and this is from The Independent. The Independent is a reputable newspaper. I have friends who work for them, but it's from 1993, and just click the link, guys.
Oh no. Oh no!
I knew who this article was going to be about the moment that I read the term Saudi businessman.
But I know it says mostly as a print meme, and it just has a photo of Bin Laden just like in the desert.
Audience, for those listening, the first 3 words of this article are Osama bin Laden. Link will be in the show notes.
Sat in his gold fringe row, guarded by the loyal Arab Mujahideen who fought alongside him in Afghanistan. Again, the headline is
Anti-Soviet warrior puts his army on the road to peace. The Saudi businessman who recruited Mujahideen now uses them for large-scale building projects in Sudan.
Perfection. So we're gonna talk about another story they wrote, and it's got like the makings of a perfect story for us on this episode. It's got balloons. It's got Muammar Gaddafi. It is a shame then that I have to ruin this for everyone because it's a clickbait nothing burger. Quote, Muammar Gaddafi, not one to skip a chance to annoy the great Satan, might have single-handedly scuppered America's latest shot at glory, a solo attempt to circle the earth in a balloon. Libya first denied, then granted Steve Fawcett, the balloon's pilot, permission to enter Libyan airspace, but the delay obliged him to take a southern detour over Niger and Chad, wasting precious fuel. That's it. A guy trying to fly a balloon around the world showed up at Libyan airspace and was told to fuck off, and then a couple of hours later was given permission.
Damn,
that's it.
This is a cock block. I waited months for
Muammar
this.
Gaddafi was not personally involved in this story.
Damn it.
See, now I feel bad because I tipped you off to this because I just found that one photo.
No.
And
I think that's good because it's still like, I think it's worth talking about. This does lead into something else because it taught me about Steve Fawcett, who we will definitely be doing an episode on later.
Here I was thinking that we were going to have some like mad Gaddafi plan to like float the entire country of Libya off the planet with a giant balloon.
Yeah, everyone else is using rockets. Everyone else is doing Project Orion. But the guy who gave up his nuclear program, has to use balloons now. So basically the proposition they lay out in this article is that by making this balloonist wait a little while before letting him go through Libyan airspace, they fucked over America's big shot at getting this new record. Now, in the end, whether the delay was the cause for this or not, Fawcett did not make it around the world, instead crashing in a tree in India. Based on that, I don't think he would have made it around the world because he only made it halfway, and he's saying that a delay of like an hour or 2 ruined everything. Again, I will want to talk about Steve Fawcett in the future. He's basically like, he's a millionaire who like, he made his millions in finance and then basically decided that he wanted to like break flight records for the rest of his life. He was the first man to fly around the Earth solo in a balloon, and then he flew around the Earth solo in an airplane. And his death is actually very interesting because he died in a normal plane crash in 2007. Like his plane went missing in the mountains.
that's what they want you to think.
The search for the crash site turned into a weird tech bro race because Google Earth got a bunch of volunteers to check, like to pan over every millimeter of Google Earth in California to try and find like the debris. And Amazon got 50,000 volunteers through the Mechanical Turk program to do the same thing, and they competed with each other to try and find this plane. Even worse, the search and rescue crews had to deal with shitloads of psychics showing up who said they had visions of where Fawcett's body was. None of this worked. In the end, I believe the search and rescue team just found him, and they're on record saying that like all of these crowdsourcing attempts made their jobs significantly harder.
That tracks.
It does.
Every time.
This is just like going back to Earl Curley whenever we were talking about Cosmos 954. Like a psychic just showing up and going like, yo, I know exactly where to look.
So we started this episode with rich dickheads in balloons.
Yes.
And now we're ending with like rich dickheads trying to interfere with a search and rescue attempt after a balloonist crashes and dies. Okay, great.
Yeah, well, he was flying a plane at that point, but he was a balloonist. Yeah.
Nicholas, there's a phrase that's oft repeated on this show, and that is time is a flat circle. A circle is a sphere.
Circle is a sphere.
I don't think we invented that, to be fair.
What do you mean? I've been saying it all episode.
What is a rocket but a balloon? Okay, here's the thing. Balloon tanks.
What is a balloon but a sphere?
You can make balloon tanks into a rocket. Balloons can be rockets. It's all coming together. Circles, cylinders, rockets. Muammar Gaddafi.
The most like insane pulp comic cover ever.
What is a cylinder if not
Joseph
an
Stalin?
extruded circle?
More than most of our episodes, this one I hope it was just kind of fun, and it covers like the bookending stuff I find fun and interesting. I do wish that the Gaddafi story was not just clickbait.
I can't believe that I waited like months. That was the one thing that I knew about this episode going into it. I knew that Gaddafi was making an appearance. I thought that there was going to be a serious thing. I have been cock-blocked.
I was not doing that deliberately. In writing this script, I had everything written except the Gaddafi stuff. I read the Gaddafi stuff 2 or 3 days ago, or I guess it would have been like a week ago now. That's when I figured it out. That's when I wrote it. I was not sending you the Gaddafi stuff like, oh, I'm gonna love this whenever they don't get to see Gaddafi.
I'm not saying that you did it by design. I'm just saying that the cosmos has conspired against me to deny me the satisfaction of some kind of, to deny me the satisfaction
like a portly millionaire getting fucked over by Muammar Gaddafi.
Just there's always a fun story when Muammar Gaddafi is involved.
Which is exactly what happened to the Otrag guy.
Yeah. He literally also got cuckolded by the Otrag, by Gaddafi, so yeah.
So yeah, that, everyone, is the story of the pre-space race. Nicholas, thank you so much for coming on.
I'm so happy to be here. This is amazing.
Thank you for being here again.
Audience, if you would like to hear more of Nicholas being on our show, consider signing up for the Patreon. If you sign up at any tier, you will get access to our monthly bonus episodes where mostly we review old movies. The most recent of which is the classic Soviet sci-fi movie Solaris, where Nicholas was a guest.
What did we learn today? Well, you guys learned about the Independent article about Bin Laden, which makes me so happy.
Yeah, that will be linked below. Audience, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Failure to Launch. And remember, don't fall for clickbait, and don't put it in your podcast.
There's not oxygen in the stratosphere. I don't know.
No, cats cannot survive without oxygen. Remember that. Audience, don't put your cat in the oxygen deprivation chamber that you have in your apartment.
Audience, don't consume liquid oxygen.
Audience, don't let the Boy Scouts design your high-altitude balloon.
I love the idea of, telling the audience not to do things that are, very obvious not to do things, but it's like a weird reverse psychology thing where it's like the Call of the Void.
Well, fuck you.
The Call of the Void has them hey, fuck you, I'll do what I want.
Audience, don't have your identical twin brother replace you at a Stratosphere balloon launch.
Audience, get ready for balloons. Learn how to use balloons, because the Olympics is bringing them back, baby.
Audience, get balloons. Learn balloons. Thank you to everyone who have signed up to support the show, and a big shout out to all of our top tier patrons. Our sideboard cats are Boss, Charlie, June, Matt, Spectre Cohen, and Tortilla Baron. Our space dogs are Ben L, Brandon M, Fractal Moonlight, Furious Luddite, John C, Oliver, Sparks, Tom M, Wingsmith, Winter, and Zim.
Albert count 17.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Failure to Launch. If you want to follow us, we are Failure to Launch on Blue Sky and FT Launch Pod on Instagram. We also post our episodes with visual aids at Failure to Launch Podcast on YouTube. All music was provided by DJ Danarchy.